Usually when we look at like a medical diagnosis or something, there is this strict expectation of precision, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's very cut and dry.
Yeah, it operates almost like structural engineering. You break your arm, they do an x-ray, and there's this jagged white fracture line, and the radiologist literally points to it and says, there is the exact point of failure. It's totally quantifiable.
Right, because it's a binary state. The bone is either compromised or it's intact. And I think we find, a really deep psychological comfort in that kind of categorical visibility.
Exactly. But the moment you pivot into the realm of human communication, specifically the cognitive mechanisms behind how our brains process language and intent and subtext, that x-ray machine just completely shatters.
It really does. You're left with nothing.
Right. We are no longer looking at a clean fracture. We are navigating this linguistic landscape that is, it's inherently murky. It's driven by invisible rules and these constant real-time recalculations.
Which is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, you really cannot put a pragmatic human exchange under a microscope, because language isn't just about the lexical definition of words. It is an incredibly delicate, really high-stakes game of behavioral predictions.
Yeah, and to really illustrate the sheer computational load of that game, I want to construct a scenario for you, and for the listener, too. It's a super mundane setup, but we are going to look at it through the lens of cognitive processing.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So imagine it is 6 o'clock in the morning. You've had, realistically, maybe 4 hours of highly fragmented sleep.
Ugh, painful.
Right, and the alarm triggers. But it's not a gentle chime. It's that harsh, cortisol spiking klaxon sound.
Oh, the worst way to wake up.
Totally. So you drag yourself out of bed, operating entirely on your basal ganglia's autopilot, and you just stumble into the kitchen.
The universal march of the sleep-deprived human.
Yeah.
I mean, your prefrontal cortex is barely online at this point.
Precisely. It is barely functioning. You are attempting a super low complexity motor task, which is just making a cup of coffee. But, your fine motor skills are compromised.
That's right.
So you misjudge the spatial relation between your hand and the counter, and disaster. You drop the ceramic mug, it just shatters.
Oh, no.
Yeah, searing hot coffee coats the floor, splatters across the cabinets. It completely saturates your socks.
The wet socks are the worst part.
The absolute worst. So you're standing there, your sympathetic nervous system is flaring up, and you feel utterly defeated. And in that exact microsecond, your roommate walks in.
Okay, the variable of an external observer has been introduced.
Right. They scan the shattered ceramic, they look at the expanding puddle of coffee, they see your miserable expression, and your roommate just smiles and says, "Well, you're looking energetic today."
A beautiful collision of lexical positivity and situational disaster.
Exactly. And here's the central mystery we are unpacking on today's deep dive. Why doesn't that statement trigger catastrophic cognitive dissonance?
It's a great question.
Because if we feed that sentence into like a rudimentary computer parsing algorithm, the dictionary definitions form a complement. They explicitly stated, you look energetic.
Right, the raw data is positive.
But your brain's immediate instinctual reaction isn't genuine confusion or, amygdala-driven rage at being lied to. Instead, you might exhale a sharp breath, maybe roll your eyes, or even laugh.
Yeah.
How does the human brain, in literally a fraction of a second, entirely invert the semantic meaning of a sentence and recognize it as solidarity rather than an insult?
Well, what's happening in that fraction of a second is a staggering display of computational gymnastics. I mean, your brain is instantaneously decoding a layered, completely invisible set of rules that govern cooperative human interaction.
Wow.
And it's doing that while simultaneously analyzing acoustic frequencies in the speaker's voice.
And that is exactly what we are dissecting today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are going to explore these invisible contracts of conversation, the evolutionary necessity of purposefully breaking those contracts, the acoustic physics of how we signal those breaks, and ultimately how understanding this underlying architecture can drastically optimize the way you acquire and process new languages.
Yeah, and to really understand the complexity of the roommate's joke, we actually need to establish a baseline first.
Okay, where do we start?
We have to look at the fundamental mechanics of language processing, specifically focusing on the friction points that occur when someone is acquiring a second language.
Right.
Because that friction, that struggle, reveals the hidden machinery of how language actually works.
Yeah, and I see this constantly with language learners. You have someone who can, read a dense academic journal in their target language, or they can draft a flawless, syntactically complex email.
Oh, sure. Perfect grammar on paper.
But then you drop them into a loud coffee shop and ask them to engage in rapid-fire banter with a barista, and their cognitive processing just adjusting, it completely halts. The vocabulary evaporates.
They freeze.
Yeah, they freeze. Why is the proficiency gap between the receptive skills, like reading, and the productive skills, like live speaking, so immense?
The disparity primarily comes down to the concept of working memory and the existence of a pause button.
A pause button.
Yeah. Think about the mechanics of reading or writing. These are asynchronous activities. If you encounter an unfamiliar morphological structure in a text, the text remains static.
It doesn't run away from you.
Exactly. You can pause, you can allocate more working memory to decipher the context, or, you can just consult an external database like a dictionary.
Right. You control the flow of time, and writing is the same, right? You have the backspace key. You can draft, you can review, you can edit before you ever commit to the output. So the cognitive load is distributed over time.
Precisely. But live, face-to-face conversation, that is a relentless, synchronous stream of data.
There's no backspace in real life.
None. There is no pause button. The phonemes are hitting your auditory cortex in real time. You have to parse the phonetic stream, retrieve the semantic meaning from your mental lexicon, construct an appropriate syntactical response, and then execute the motor functions to actually vocalize that response.
And all of that is happening within milliseconds.
Milliseconds. The pressure on the working memory buffer is immense, which is why the system often freezes.
Okay, I want to push back on the framing of this freeze response, though.
Okay.
Because colloquially, I think we tend to frame language paralysis as a purely psychological phenomenon.
Yeah.
We categorize it as the affective filter hypothesis.
Right, social anxiety.
Yeah, fear of negative evaluation, the dread of sounding foolish in front of a native speaker. Are we saying that this paralysis is just an overflow of the working memory buffer combined with social anxiety?
Well, no. The affective filter is a massive variable, undoubtedly. A spiked cortisol level from anxiety will objectively impede memory retrieval.
We've all been there.
Right. But what is consistently overlooked, and what we really need to emphasize here, is that this paralysis is also deeply physiological.
Physiological? Wait, really?
Yes. It is a literal lack of physical muscle memory and neuromyelination.
Okay, let's unpack this. When you say muscle memory, are we talking about something akin to the motor pathways developed by a professional athlete, like, I don't know, a tennis player perfecting a serve?
It is the exact same biological mechanism.
Wow.
Think about the biomechanics of speaking your native language. You do not consciously instruct your diaphragm to push air, right? Or your vocal folds to tense to a specific frequency, or your tongue to strike the alveolar ridge behind your teeth to produce a T sound.
No, absolutely not. It operates entirely below the level of conscious thought. The motor cortex handles the execution, while my conscious mind focuses purely on, like, the abstract concept I want to convey.
Exactly. And it handles the execution flawlessly because you have spent decades reinforcing those specific neural pathways.
Right.
In neurobiology, there is a substance called myelin. It's a fatty sheath that wraps around the axons of your neurons.
Okay, myelin.
Yeah. It acts like insulation on a copper wire, drastically increasing the speed and efficiency of the electrical signals traveling from your brain to your muscles. Your native language pathways are heavily myelinated superhighways.
So if we extend that logic to a second language, I might already know the vocabulary abstractly from a textbook, but the neural pathways connecting that new vocabulary to my physical larynx and tongue, they are unmyelinated.
Precisely. They are unpaved dirt roads.
Unpaved dirt roads. That's a great image.
Right. Your brain is not only juggling the immense cognitive load of foreign syntax and vocabulary retrieval, but it's also attempting to send novel electrical signals to physical articulators, your mouth and throat, to produce phonetic sounds you have rarely, if ever, physically practiced.
So the freeze isn't just fear. It is the physiological fatigue of an unoptimized motor system trying to perform this highly complex, completely unrehearsed choreography. Okay, so if the bottleneck is physiological, a lack of myelinated pathways to the vocal articulators, then the solution has to be physical repetition, right? Not just reading more grammar books. How do we rapidly pave those neural dirt roads?
This brings us to a foundational concept in neuroplasticity, often summarized by Hebb's law.
Which is?
Neurons that fire together, wire together. The most efficient hack for language optimization is a physical regimen we call the 10-minute speaking habit.
A 10-minute daily requirement. I mean, that seems almost too minimal to affect physical neurology. How does this actually bridge the gap?
Well, the duration is actually less critical than the consistency in the physical execution. It must be out loud, and must be daily.
Okay, out loud.
Yes. The objective isn't to have a philosophically deep conversation. The objective is motor cortex activation.
Yeah.
You don't need a native tutor or an immersive environment. You just need to force your articulators to physically move.
So it's essentially shadowboxing for the vocal cords.
I love that. Yes.
I could be entirely alone in my apartment, narrating the process of making dinner. Like, I am boiling the water. I am chopping the garlic. The semantic complexity doesn't matter. It's just about the physical transmission of the signal from the brain to the mouth.
Exactly. Every time you force the electrical signal down that unpaved road, you are triggering the brain to begin wrapping those specific axons in myelin. Every time you vocalize the target language, you are physically upgrading your neurological hardware.
Let's actually ground this for the listener right now as a thought experiment. Think about the motor sequences required for your typical morning.
Oh, this is good.
The moment you wake up, what is the exact physical sequence of actions you take? I want you to formulate that sentence in your target language and physically articulate it out loud. Feel the mechanics of your jaw and tongue executing that sequence.
That physical sensation of friction, that slight clumsiness in the mouth, that is the exact physiological site where learning happens.
That's incredible. Okay, so once we have heavily myelinated those pathways and the physical act of vocalization becomes automatic, we can elevate our analysis. We step out of the isolated brain and into the social arena.
Right, because language doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Exactly. The moment words leave our mouth, they are governed by a complex, invisible architecture of human interaction.
And the foundational blueprint of that architecture is a concept articulated by the philosopher Paul Grice, known as the cooperative principle.
The cooperative principle.
Yes. Grice proposed that human conversation isn't just a random exchange of data. Whenever two humans communicate, they implicitly enter into a highly structured mutual contract built on the assumption of cooperation.
Okay, let's unpack this because on the surface, cooperation sounds overly optimistic, maybe a bit naive.
How so?
If you look at human history or even just spend 10 minutes on social media, people are intensely uncooperative. They obfuscate, they dodge questions, they manipulate, and they lie constantly. How does a framework based on foundational cooperation survive in a reality filled with deceit?
It's the essential paradox of communication, really. But from an evolutionary and game theory perspective, Grice is entirely correct. Think of it this way. Deceit is only effective if it is camouflaged against a massive background of truth.
It's the free rider problem. Like a parasite needs a healthy host to survive.
Exactly. If the baseline expectation of human interaction was deception, if you inherently believe that everyone was lying to you 100% of the time, the entire utility of language would instantly collapse.
That makes total sense. You couldn't ask for directions, you couldn't trade goods, you couldn't learn from others' experiences. The system only functions because our default algorithm assumes the other party is cooperating to transmit accurate information.
Right. We default to trust.
So what are the specific clauses in this invisible cooperative contract? Grice outlined several conversational maxims, right?
He did. We can distill them into three primary pillars for our purposes today. Pillar one is the maxim of quality, which essentially dictates truthfulness. We operate on the assumption that the speaker is conveying information they genuinely believe to be true and that they have adequate evidence for what they're saying.
So, no spontaneous fabrication. What is the second pillar?
The maxim of manner, which focuses on clarity. It dictates that speakers should avoid obscurity, avoid ambiguity, and present their information in an orderly, efficient way. You don't intentionally convolute your syntax to confuse the listener.
Truthfulness and clarity. And the third?
The maxim of relation, or simply relevance. We expect that whatever data is introduced into the conversation is directly relevant to the immediate context of the exchange.
Let's test that expectation of relevance, because when a maxim is abruptly violated, it creates a super visceral cognitive dissonance.
It really does.
If we are collaborating on a project at work, and I turn to you and ask, what time is the data migration finishing today? And you reply, looking entirely serious, I find that Gouda pairs best with a dry cracker.
A catastrophic violation of relevance.
Right. The brain literally stutters. The auditory cortex processed the English perfectly, but the semantic parser crashes because it cannot find the logical bridge between data migration and cheese.
The expectation of relevance was shattered.
It just completely highlights how algorithmic our social interactions actually are. We rely on predictable state matrices. It's very much like the complex, implicit trust we display when navigating a busy four-way traffic intersection.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. The entire system of modern transportation relies on the invisible contract that other drivers will obey the red light. I don't know the driver approaching the intersection at 50 miles an hour. I don't know their moral character. But I step on the gas when my light turns green because I trust the rules of the road.
The cooperative principle is the traffic light of human language. It is literally the only thing preventing total societal gridlock.
Which brings us to the crux of the issue. If this Grecian contract of truth, clarity, and relevance is so vital to the survival of human communication, why do we constantly, intentionally jump the curb and drive our conversational cars directly onto the sidewalk?
Because human interaction is not purely about the efficient transfer of raw data. It is equally, if not more so, about managing social relationships and ego. This brings us back to the roommate with the shattered coffee mug. When they said, "You were looking energetic today," they deliberately flouted the maxim of quality. They knowingly broadcast a falsehood.
But the motivation wasn't malicious deception. The motivation was social preservation.
Exactly. Direct, literal language, while highly efficient, often carries a very sharp, abrasive edge. In linguistics, this ties into politeness theory, developed by Brown and Levinson. They talk about face, our public self-image.
Right, saving face.
Exactly. If your roommate used literal language, adhering strictly to the Grecian maxims, they would say, "Your spatial awareness is impaired, you look physically exhausted, and you have damaged our kitchen."
Which is 100% truthful, 100% clear, and 100% relevant.
Oh,
And it would also immediately trigger my amygdala. I would perceive it as a direct attack on my competence, my face, and I would escalate into defensive hostility. The literal truth in a moment of vulnerability is inherently damaging.
precisely. So evolutionary sociology equipped us with a linguistic buffer mechanism. We purposefully flout the maxim of truth to soften the reality. We use verbal irony to construct a social cushion.
By stating the diametric opposite of the literal truth, we acknowledge the shared reality without directly attacking the ego.
Yes, verbal irony is a pro-social bonding mechanism. You are highlighting an external situation, the broken mug or terrible weather, and framing it as a shared absurdity. You form a coalition against the event, turning a moment of stress into an inside joke.
For instance, walking out into a blinding sub-zero blizzard in January and remarking, "Well, the global warming is really kicking in today." You violate the truth, but you establish solidarity against the freezing wind. But this is where linguistic definitions get highly contested, I think. People constantly conflate verbal irony with sarcasm, treating them as interchangeable synonyms for saying the opposite of what you mean.
Oh, constantly.
But structurally and psychologically, they serve vastly different functions.
They belong to the same mechanical family. They both flout the Grecian's maxim of truth, but their vectors of intent are entirely different. Verbal irony is a shield. Sarcasm is a targeted weapon.
A weapon.
In fact, the etymology of the word sarcasm comes from the Greek word sarkazine, which literally translates to tear flesh.
To tear flesh. Wow, that perfectly encapsulates the shift in intent. Irony targets an abstract situation. Sarcasm targets a specific human being.
It's deeply personal and explicitly critical. Sarcasm leverages the architecture of a compliment to deliver an insult. It bypasses the social cushion entirely and uses the contradiction to highlight someone's specific failing.
Let's map out a high-contrast scenario for the listener to isolate the mechanics of this flesh tearing.
Okay, shoot.
Imagine a corporate environment. You are partnered with a coworker on a critical, high-stakes deliverable, and this coworker structurally avoids all responsibility. They spend 3 weeks aggressively mismanaging their time, delegating their tasks back to you, and offering zero productive output.
A classic free rider.
Right. So you absorb their workload, you pull the all-nighters, and you push the project across the finish line. The project is a massive success. The lazy coworker casually approaches your desk, smiles, and says, "Wow, we really crushed that project."
Yes, a masterclass in unearned credit.
Exactly. And you maintain direct eye contact and reply, "Yes, your tireless dedication really carried us through."
That is the deployment of weaponized sarcasm.
Because the semantic layer the actual lexicon used is purely positive. Tireless dedication carried us. But the pragmatic layer, the actual meaning interpreted in context, is a devastating critique of their laziness. It isn't a shared joke about a situation. It is a surgical strike on their professional character.
And this duality creates an immense problem for artificial intelligence, and frankly, for non-native speakers. Because if you feed the transcript of that interaction into a standard natural language processor, the machine reads tireless dedication, and categorizes the interaction as positive reinforcement.
The machine completely misses the point.
Completely. The hostility is entirely invisible in the text.
The text is a decoy. So where does the actual data regarding the speaker's hostility reside, if not in the syntax?
It resides in the acoustic channel. The secret to decoding intent lies in the physics of sound, a field known as acoustic phonetics. Specifically, it lies in prosody.
Prosody. It's the overarching acoustic framework of our speech, right? The fundamental frequency, the amplitude, the duration of syllables, the music of language.
Exactly. When we break the Grecian contract, we must provide the listener with an auditory key to let them know we are playing a game. Otherwise, they just think we are lying. And what's fascinating about English prosody is that it is bifurcated.
Bifurcated how?
We have evolved two entirely distinct acoustic melodies to signal different variations of sarcasm.
Oh, wow. Okay, let's analyze the first variation. What is the acoustic profile of bantering sarcasm? This is the prosody we use when we want to mock a friend but maintain the safety of the relationship.
Right. Bantering prosody is characterized by a significant expansion of the fundamental frequency, or F0. The pitch of the voice sweeps drastically higher. The syllable duration is elongated. We slow the words down and the amplitude, the volume increases. It sounds highly exaggerated, almost theatrical.
It mimics the hyper-expressive cadence of speaking to a child almost. Like if my friend boasts about their mechanical prowess, attempts to fix my bicycle, and immediately snaps the chain in half, I would employ that expanded frequency. I'd raise my pitch, stretch the vowels, and say, oh, absolute brilliant technique there.
Yes. That acoustic hyperbole acts as a biological safety signal. It tells their brain, I am challenging your competence, but the exaggerated melody proves this is a simulation. We are safe.
But if the offense is genuinely severe, if the goal is not to playfully tease, but to express profound disrespect or anger, that expanded melody disappears completely. We switch to the second variation, scornful sarcasm.
Scorn requires a vastly different acoustic signature. In scornful prosody, the fundamental frequency is severely compressed.
Compressed, so it gets lower.
Exactly. The pitch drops to the lower registers of the speaker's vocal range. The amplitude decreases. All natural emotional inflection is stripped away, creating a flat, deadpan delivery, often accompanied by vocal fry.
Vocal fry, like that low rattling vibration in the vocal cords?
That's the one. The deadpan delivery is crucial.
Right, because if an incompetent colleague accidentally deletes a server holding a year's worth of financial data, I don't use the bouncy, high-pitched banter. I compress my vocal range, I hollow out the emotion, and I say with a flat, quiet intensity, well, that was a stroke of genius.
Exactly. The juxtaposition of the complementary text against the cold, compressed acoustic physics is what generates the hostility. The lack of melody is the weapon.
And here is where we connect this back to the friction of language acquisition. The mapping of intent to prosody is not biologically universal. It is a culturally constructed phenomenon.
This is one of the most significant hurdles in cross-linguistic pragmatics. Every language evolves its own acoustic markers for irony. A native English speaker's auditory cortex is wired to listen for that specific S0 compression to detect scorn.
Okay, but what if English isn't your first language?
Well, if a listener's native language is Mandarin, which is a tonal language where pitch directly dictates lexical meaning, or Spanish or German, their brain has been trained on an entirely different set of acoustic pragmatics.
Yeah, I was reading research indicating that in some languages, irony isn't signaled by a pitch drop at all, but by the insertion of specific morphological particles, or even by accelerating the rate of speech rather than slowing it down.
Exactly. So when a non-native speaker hears your flat, scornful English delivery, their auditory cortex doesn't flag it as an anomaly. They aren't listening for a pitch drop. They're waiting for a cultural cue that doesn't exist in English.
So because the acoustic signal is missed, their brain defaults to the semantic layer. They process the literal dictionary definition, and they mistakenly believe you are genuinely praising the colleague who deleted the server.
It's a complete failure of the pragmatic interface. And it requires immense cognitive effort to rewire that system. You essentially have to train the motor cortex to physically produce that flat, compressed pitch, because executing the physical action helps the auditory cortex map the sound to the concept.
Which is why that 10-minute speaking habit is paramount. You must practice the physical manipulation of your vocal folds to truly master the pragmatic layer of a new language.
Absolutely.
But stepping back from the acoustic mechanics for a second, we arrive at a profound philosophical question regarding the evolution of human cognition. Here's where it gets really interesting.
The why.
Precisely. Why did the human brain evolve such a baroque, computationally expensive system? Think about the cognitive load we've just described. To execute a sarcastic joke, I have to retrieve vocabulary, construct a syntactically valid sentence that means the opposite of reality, manipulate my vocal folds to alter the fundamental frequency of my speech, and constantly monitor the listener's theory of mind to ensure they decode the encrypted message without taking offense.
It's exhausting just listing it.
It is massively inefficient. Why didn't we just evolve to speak literal truth with zero ambiguity?
It's a question that has consumed psycholinguistics for decades. Why do we embrace the risk of misunderstanding? The current consensus revolves around two highly sophisticated theories of cognition. The first, developed by Dan Sperber and Deirdre Wilson, is known as echoic theory.
Echoic. Wait, drawing a parallel to the acoustic reflection of sound waves against a canyon wall.
Exactly. But in this case, we aren't echoing a sound. We are echoing a thought, a societal norm, or an unmet expectation.
Okay, I'm following.
Echoic theory posits that verbal irony is fundamentally an act of meta-representation. When you make an ironic statement, you are not merely describing the current disappointing reality. You are retrieving a past hope, a previous utterance, or an implicit cultural expectation, and holding it up as a mirror against the failure of the present moment.
I want to build out a robust narrative to really dissect how that meta-representation works. Let's say you and I have spent weeks orchestrating a massive, elaborate outdoor event, a reunion picnic. We've invested heavily in imported food, we've tracked the meteorological data for weeks, and we've built up this shared, idealized mental model of a sun-drenched, perfect afternoon.
You have constructed a highly specific expectation matrix.
Right. And on the morning of the event, we transport everything to the park, we lay out the blankets, we unpack the food, and suddenly a massive, unpredicted low-pressure system moves in.
Oh, classic.
Within 3 minutes, the sky turns charcoal and a torrential downpour unleashes. The imported food is destroyed, we are saturated with freezing rain, and the entire endeavor collapses into chaos. I turn to you, wiping mud off my face, and I say, what an absolutely wonderful day.
Now, analyze the mechanics of that utterance through the echoic lens. Your statement is not directed at the thunderstorm.
No, my statement is explicitly quoting the optimistic predictions we made yesterday. I am conjuring the ghost of our past hope, the wonderful day, and forcing it into direct contact with miserable reality.
And the psychological release, so the reason we find this humorous rather than purely devastating, exists entirely in the friction between that echoed hope and the brutal reality.
Richard.
Yes. Echoic irony acts as an emotional pressure valve. It allows the human psyche to acknowledge and process deep disappointment without succumbing to despair or rage.
It is an incredibly sophisticated coping mechanism. We laugh at the absurdity of the universe's failure to meet our expectations. But, echoic theory doesn't perfectly explain every instance of sarcasm. If we return to the scenario of the lazy coworker who claimed credit for my work, I wasn't harboring a deep hope that they would be lazy. There is no past expectation of success to echo there.
Which necessitates the second major framework, pretense theory, heavily championed by psychologists like Herbert Clark and Richard Garrick.
Pretense, implying an act of theatrical simulation.
Yes, pretense theory argues that sarcasm is fundamentally a micro-theatrical performance. When you use sarcasm, you instantaneously adopt a persona. You put on an invisible mask and inhabit the character of a deeply naive, foolish, or unobservant person.
So when I looked at the lazy coworker and said, your tireless dedication carried us, I am literally simulating a reality where I am an oblivious, easily manipulated manager who actually believes this person contributed.
You are. You are acting out the role of the gullible fool. And by demonstrating how ridiculous that fool sounds, you are indirectly critiquing the coworker's behavior.
But running a simulation inside a conversation requires an immense amount of theory of mind. How can I guarantee that my listener recognizes I am simulating a persona rather than just assuming I've genuinely lost my grip on reality?
That is the genius and the danger of pretense theory. Clark argues that a sarcastic utterance is designed for a divided audience. Whenever you speak sarcastically, you are managing two distinct cognitive profiles in the room: the smart audience and the foolish audience.
Outline the cognitive profile of the smart audience for us.
The smart audience possesses the necessary contextual data. They know the history of the lazy coworker. They can decode your compressed prosodic pitch drop. They recognize the mask. When you speak, you are effectively winking at the smart audience, inviting them to join you in the meta joke.
They share my reality
Yeah.
and the foolish audience.
The foolish audience is often hypothetical. It represents the naive observer, the persona you are currently mocking. You are weaponizing the utterance against the foolish audience for the amusement of the smart audience.
Just pausing to appreciate the architectural complexity of what we are describing. I mean, we are asking a language learner to retrieve vocabulary, parse grammar, decode acoustic at zero compressions, recognize the flouting of a Gratian maxim, determine if the speaker is echoing a past expectation to relieve trauma, or deduce if they are simulating a naive persona to divide the audience into in-groups and out-groups, all within a 500 millisecond window.
It is nothing short of a biological miracle that human communication functions at all. The cognitive load is astronomical.
It profoundly validates the sheer neurological exhaustion experienced by anyone operating in a second language. You aren't just translating words, you are deciphering overlapping layers of social and psychological realities.
Which is why mastering the specific syntactical and rhetorical tools we use to manipulate these realities is so vital. If we understand the psychology of why we soften reality, we must examine how we construct the sentences to achieve it.
Okay, let's dissect the mechanics. What are the primary rhetorical structures we employ to manipulate the intensity of truth?
The most elegant and pervasive tool for semantic manipulation is a classical rhetorical device known as litotes.
Litotes. Originating from ancient Greek rhetoric, right? It was used extensively in Homeric epics. How does it operate grammatically?
The mechanic of litotes is fascinating because it forces the brain to process a logical negation. It is the use of a double negative or a negated antonym to express an affirmative concept. You are affirming a positive reality by explicitly denying its opposite.
Negating a negative to create a positive. Let's contextualize that with a common real-world application.
Imagine you secure a reservation at a highly exclusive Michelin-starred restaurant. The chef prepares a Wagyu steak. You taste it, and the culinary experience is transcendent.
Okay, my mouth is watering.
The chef approaches your table and asks for your assessment. In casual English, what is the most highly probable response you would give?
If I'm operating in a casual register, I am highly unlikely to say, this is a triumph of gastronomy. I would likely nod, lean back, and say, you know what? That is not bad at all.
Not bad. You utilize the negative particle not attached to the negative adjective bad to convey a high degree of positive satisfaction.
And pragmatically, not bad doesn't mean mediocre or neutral. In that context, it signifies exceptional quality.
Exactly. Or consider evaluating a piece of amateur art. You might look at a painting and diplomatically state, well, it's no masterpiece. You are using the negation of a high positive no masterpiece to softly indicate that it is, in fact, quite poor without having to use the aggressive word terrible.
Right.
Or looking at a luxury sports car and remarking, not too shabby. Shabby denotes something dilapidated and ruined. Denying its shabbiness is a powerful form of praise.
So let's analyze the sociology behind this. Processing double negatives increases cognitive load. Why engage in this syntactical friction? Why not just use direct affirmative adjectives like excellent or beautiful?
It stems from deep-seated cultural norms surrounding modesty and the mitigation of face-threatening acts. In many societies, expressing extreme, unbridled enthusiasm or, conversely, extreme denigration is perceived as socially aggressive, boastful, or emotionally unregulated.
Interesting.
Litotes serves as an emotional dampener. It allows a speaker to express high praise or satisfaction while maintaining a posture of detached coolness. It regulates the emotional temperature of the exchange.
It's an ego protection mechanism. We hedge our bets. And the fascinating sociolinguistic reality is that litotes is not an isolated English quirk. The desire to hedge through negation is a globally distributed phenomenon.
It completely transcends language families. In French, the phrase pas mal, literally not bad, is a ubiquitous expression of high approval.
The same applies in Russian. The word neploho translates precisely to not bad, but its pragmatic function is to signal strong, quiet approval. The human instinct to mitigate aggression through syntax is universal.
But language demands equilibrium. If litotes is the tool we use to downregulate and minimize reality, we also possess a tool designed to aggressively upregulate and amplify it. Hyperbole.
Hyperbole. The deliberate, extreme exaggeration of reality for rhetorical effect.
Yes. If you are forced to wait in line at a municipal office for precisely 12 minutes, you do not return home and say, I experienced a minor delay of 12 minutes. You throw your keys on the counter and declare, I was waiting at the post office for 1,000,000 years.
A blatant flouting of the Gratian maxim of truth.
Entirely. But the listener's brain instantly recognizes the mathematical impossibility of a million years, bypasses the literal falsehood, and extracts the pragmatic truth. The speaker is attempting to convey the massive scale of their psychological frustration, not the literal passage of time.
I want to return to the concept of downregulation, though, because while litotes is used for modesty, understatement possesses a profoundly powerful psychological application when deployed during moments of severe crisis.
Oh, absolutely. Let's explore the neurobiology of crisis management.
I want to construct a high-stakes, disastrous scenario to illustrate this. Let's say a close friend borrows your brand new, highly expensive vehicle. They need to run a brief errand. 2 minutes later, you hear the unmistakable, violent sound of crunching metal and shattering glass from your driveway.
A nightmare.
Truly. You sprint outside and discover that your friend inadvertently engaged reverse instead of drive, accelerated aggressively, and embedded the entire rear chassis of your car into an ancient oak tree. The trunk is obliterated, the structural integrity of the car is ruined.
The catastrophic property loss.
You approach the wreckage, you look at your vehicle, and then you look at your friend, who is hyperventilating, gripping the steering wheel, completely flooded with adrenaline and panic. You exhale slowly, look them in the eye, and say, well, you might want to drive a little slower next time.
Drive a little slower. An understatement of staggering magnitude.
But analyze the choice there. Why deploy soft, ironic understatement when your property has been destroyed? I mean, the instinctual reaction would be to unleash an amygdala-driven verbal assault, screaming, assigning blame, expressing fury.
Because in a state of acute crisis, understatement transcends humor. It becomes a profound mechanism for empathy and neurological regulation.
Regulating the other person's nervous system.
Precisely. Consider your friend's physiological state. Their sympathetic nervous system has hijacked their brain. Their HPA axis is dumping cortisol and adrenaline into their bloodstream. They're in acute fight or flight. If you approach the car screaming, your aggressive acoustic prosody acts as an accelerant. You will push their panic into full-blown hysteria.
It's an emotional contagion effect. My panic amplifies theirs.
But by utilizing an extreme understatement, you are broadcasting a vital meta message. You are demonstrating absolute executive function. You are signaling, I recognize the physical destruction of the vehicle, but I am prioritizing our social bond over the property. I am maintaining control of my emotional state, which means you have permission to downregulate your nervous system and calm down.
It's incredible. Irony and understatement aren't merely weapons for cynical coworkers. They can function as a protective psychological shield. We throw this linguistic blanket over someone to insulate them from our own instinctual rage.
It is a beautiful, highly evolved shield, however.
The inevitable caveat.
It is a shield constructed of incredibly fragile glass. The moment you introduce ambiguity, the moment you intentionally break the Grecian contract of clarity, you accept immense emotional risk.
The high-wire act of pragmatics. Because if the listener fails to decode the encrypted message, if they miss the prosodic cue, or fail to recognize the pretense simulation, the communication collapses entirely, often resulting in severe relational damage.
And psycholinguistic research indicates that the risk of catastrophic misinterpretation is not evenly distributed. Specific demographic and cultural variables drastically increase the likelihood of pragmatic failure.
Let's analyze those risk vectors. Who is most susceptible to missing the cue?
Age is a highly documented variable. Longitudinal studies reveal that as adults age, they increasingly rely on the literal semantic meaning of utterances, often failing to process the accompanying pragmatic and prosodic cues.
What drives that shift? Is it just cognitive decline?
While cognitive processing speeds do shift, a massive and often overlooked factor is purely audiological. Presbycusis, or age-related hearing loss.
Oh, the physical degradation of the inner ear.
Exactly. Presbycusis typically begins by degrading the ability to hear high-frequency sounds, but it also reduces the ear's ability to detect rapid shifts in pitch and subtle variations of frequency, the exact acoustic mechanics required to detect sarcasm. If an older adult is in a noisy environment, their auditory cortex might simply fail to register the rapid 200 millisecond F0 compression and signal scornful sarcasm.
The biological hardware misses the signal. So imagine a dynamic where a 17-year-old teenager attempts to bond with their 80-year-old grandfather. The teenager employs a flat, deadpan, scornful prosody to make a sarcastic, self-deprecating joke about the grandfather's cooking, assuming the shared context will carry the humor.
But the grandfather's auditory system filters out the subtle pitch drop. His brain defaults to the semantic parser. He processes the literal dictionary definition of the teenager's words, strips away the intended irony, and perceives the utterance as a direct, deeply disrespectful insult to his hospitality.
And instantaneously, a massive family conflict erupts, not out of malice, but generated entirely by a missed acoustic frequency lasting less than half a second.
It underscores why audience design tailoring your complexity to your listener's capabilities is just critical.
And this fragility extends beyond age demographics into cross-cultural pragmatics. For listeners navigating multinational corporate environments or global travel, the deployment of certain rhetorical structures is highly volatile.
The general heuristic is that self-directed understatement, using litotes to minimize your own achievements, is globally perceived as a pro-social indicator of humility. However, deploying sharp, targeted sarcasm, particularly when structured as a rhetorical question, is almost universally combustible.
A rhetorical question. Let's strictly define the mechanics of that in this context.
It is an interrogative sentence, a question that is not designed to solicit information. The speaker already knows the answer. The interrogative structure is weaponized to force the listener to acknowledge a self-evident, usually negative, reality.
Give me a high-risk scenario demonstrating this cross-cultural friction.
Imagine you are navigating a dense, highly chaotic international transit hub. A commuter, entirely absorbed in their mobile device, fails to monitor their trajectory and steps forcefully onto your foot, causing acute pain.
A very common spatial violation.
In a flash of irritation, you look at them and deploy a rhetorical question. Are you blind?
Are you blind? Ouch.
You are not a medical professional conducting an ophthalmological assessment. You have no genuine interest in their visual acuity or medical history. You are utilizing the grammatical structure of a question to aggressively highlight their spatial incompetence.
And from a cross-cultural perspective, how does that syntactical weapon land?
Disastrously. In many cultures, particularly high-context cultures that prioritize social harmony and face-saving above all else, deploying a weaponized rhetorical question to a stranger is perceived as an act of profound aggression and staggering arrogance. It bypasses any social cushion and constitutes a severe escalation. You are not just expressing pain, you are inviting physical conflict.
The pragmatics of conflict. This leads us to the ultimate stress test of human communication. We've discussed the necessity of acoustic prosody and shared physical context. But over the last 30 years, humanity migrated its social life into an environment devoid of both. The internet.
The digital migration triggered an existential crisis for pragmatics.
Because if sarcasm and irony rely almost exclusively on the physics of sound, the expanding pitch of banter, the compressed vocal fry of scorn, how does the brain process irony when staring at flat, silent text on a glowing screen?
It largely fails. When you type a comment on a forum, a social media platform, or an email, you strip away the entire acoustic channel. You strip away the kinesics, the facial expressions, and body language. The recipient is left with naked, semantically literal text.
This phenomenon was formally codified in internet culture as Poe's law, wasn't it? The adage that without a clear indicator of the author's intent, it is impossible to create a parody of extreme views that won't be mistaken by some readers as a genuine expression of those views.
Exactly. The early architecture of the internet was plagued by sprawling, chaotic flame wars. A user would post a highly sarcastic observation, intending to deploy echoic irony. But devoid of the necessary acoustic markers, a segment of the readership would process the text literally. They would experience genuine outrage, respond with hostility, and the thread would instantly devolve into a multi-participant conflict, entirely generated by the absence of a frequency compression.
So, what does this all mean for the digital age? The invisible Grecian contract simply could not survive the transition to silent text. But the resilience of human language is remarkable. When a species loses a vital tool, it doesn't just accept the deficit, it engineers a replacement. We organically evolved visual orthography to replace the lost acoustic physics.
The organic development of tone indicators.
Yes. A tone indicator is essentially an explicit metadata tag attached to the end of a digital utterance. It instructs the reader's brain on exactly which cognitive framework and virtual music to apply when decoding the text.
It is a brilliant syntactical hack. On major English-speaking digital platforms, the universally recognized tone indicator for sarcasm evolved into a simple forward slash followed by a lowercase biz.
The slash.
Yes. Consider the mechanics. You are texting a colleague regarding a brutally inefficient 3-hour logistical meeting. You type, "I simply adore sitting in gridlock circular discussions for 3 hours. It brings meaning to my existence."
If that text arrives isolated on a screen, the recipient might genuinely question your psychological stability.
But you append the metadata /s at the conclusion of the string.
It brings meaning to my existence /s.
That tiny sequence of pixels functions as a visual proxy for a prosodic pitch drop. It sends an explicit instruction to the reader's prefrontal cortex. Warning: the preceding statement flouts the maxim of quality. Do not execute literal semantic parsing. Apply a scornful, flat acoustic filter to your internal monologue while reading. It instantly eliminates the guesswork and preserves the social bond.
It is the exact same evolutionary purpose that drove the proliferation of emojis. A digital eye-rolling face or the upside-down smile isn't just decorative, it is functional digital prosody. It replaces the missing music.
And it beautifully demonstrates that language is not a static set of rules dictated by grammarians. It is a highly adaptive, living algorithm that constantly mutates to ensure humans can maintain social cohesion even across flat text screens.
We have mapped an immense cognitive landscape today. Let's briefly synthesize the architecture we've uncovered for you, the listener.
We began at the foundational neurobiology, the myelination of motor pathways required to move language from an abstract concept into physical articulation.
We established Paul Grice's cooperative principle, exploring the invisible contract of truth, clarity, and relevance.
We analyzed the evolutionary necessity of defecting from that contract, utilizing verbal irony as a social cushion and weaponizing sarcasm to tear flesh.
We mapped the acoustic physics of those defections, the expanded pitch of banter versus the compressed vocal fry of Storn, and highlighted how second language interference causes learners to miss those cultural frequencies.
We descended into the cytology, echoic theory, where we relieve disappointment by echoing a failed reality, and pretense theory, where we simulate naive personas to divide our listeners into smart and foolish audiences.
We explored the syntactical tools of litotes, the hyperamplification of hyperbole, and the neurobiological empathy of using understatement to downregulate panic during a crisis.
Finally, we navigated the failure modes, from the audiological risks of presbycusis to cross-cultural rhetorical questions, concluding with the evolution of the /s tone indicator to survive the internet.
If you are synthesizing all of this, you should recognize the staggering computational power of your own mind. You're tackling a high-level cognitive load, executing pragmatic, acoustic, and psychological calculations in milliseconds.
Which leads directly into our call to action. We want to convert this theoretical framework into tangible neuroplasticity. We are returning to the 10-minute speaking habit.
Tomorrow morning during your physical vocalization practice, do not just practice vocabulary, practice the intentional manipulation of your acoustic pragmatics.
Take a simple baseline sentence. I am having a great time. Speak it out loud 3 distinct ways. First, align the semantic and pragmatic layers. Say it with genuine, unhedged sincerity.
Then, simulate the prosody of bantering sarcasm. Target a friend. Expand your fundamental frequency, raise the pitch, increase the volume, and slow the syllable duration. I am having a great time.
Finally, simulate scornful sarcasm. You have been deeply betrayed by a situation. Compress your frequency. Hollow out the emotion. Introduce vocal fry and deliver it with flat, quiet intensity. I am having a great time.
Pay meticulous attention to the biomechanical shifts in your throat, feeling that music change is the absolute vanguard of true linguistic fluency.
But before we conclude this session, we need to address the most profound implication of this entire framework, a thought experiment to carry with you.
We are rapidly accelerating into an era dominated by artificial intelligence. We are interacting with algorithms that can generate flawless syntax, mimic tone, and parse vast amounts of semantic data.
But as we have explored today, true irony and sarcasm are deeply embodied phenomena. They rely on empathy, theory of mind, and the uniquely human, painful friction between the realities we hope for and the brutal reality we endure.
The echo of a broken expectation.
Precisely. So the ultimate question is this. As we feed these massive silicon matrices billions of parameters, will a computer ever truly understand a sarcastic joke? Can a machine that has never felt the physiological sting of disappointment ever genuinely echo a broken expectation?
Or is the messy, rule-breaking dance of irony the one thing that will always keep us uniquely human?
A profound psychological threshold to ponder.
The next time you drop a ceramic mug at 6:00 a.m. and you hear a sarcastic remark, pause the frustration. Recognize that your ability to decode that subtext and laugh is a testament to the staggering complexity of your mind. Thank you for sitting with us, practicing your language skills, and taking this deep dive. We wish you an insightful and completely sincere day.